I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Nick Suplina, Senior Vice President at Everytown For Gun Safety. Nick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's a really important conversation, but before we dive in, can you explain what is Everytown?
Everytown for Gun Safety is the largest gun violence prevention organization in the country. We operate at the federal, state, and local governments and have a presence in every state in the country. We advocate for the kind of common sense gun laws that almost all Americans agree can save lives. And we do that through a series of actions, but most importantly through our grassroots, through our Moms Demand Action, Students Demand Action, and survivor networks.
If almost all Americans can agree that common sense gun laws are necessary, are important, and are life-saving measures in this country, why aren't they enacted?
Well, I guess the first part of my answer to that is they are enacted in a lot of places, and we've seen enormous progress over the last decade with states adopting the policies that we support, that we know can make a difference. But your larger question is really about why aren't they being enacted at the rate and at the federal level at the rate that we want them to? And the answer is pretty simple. There's a very powerful gun lobby in this country that has convinced politicians that there's no room for disagreement here. That calculus is changing, and we're helping to change that calculus by activating Americans across the country in blue, purple, and red states to send a message to their elected officials in the federal government and elsewhere that they're just not going to stand for it anymore. And a great example of that was last year. We passed the first major federal legislation in a generation, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and in fact got 15 Republican senators to sign on to that bill. So, this is a marathon, not a sprint. The forces of opposition are really strong and really entrenched, but we are making progress.
I do want to touch on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act in just a little bit, but the reason I did call you today is because the country is once again reeling from a mass shooting, this time in Maine. This is the single deadliest mass shooting in all of 2023. What's your response?
Well, it's like I'm in disbelief, but not surprised that once again, an American community has been decimated by gun violence. Once again, a night that should have been fun at a bowling alley or a restaurant has turned into a war zone, and turned into a war zone created by a gun lobby that has found it fit to market and sell weapons of war to civilians. Every single senseless tragedy, including what we saw in Maine, serves as a public service announcement to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. This is the result of inaction and delay. And this is what happens when you have weak gun laws.
One of the first news stories I've ever covered, a breaking news story at the beginning of my career, was the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. That shooting, paired with shootings in Nashville, Uvalde, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, among others, a similarity is the weapon that was used, and that was an AR-15. AR-15 was also used in this shooting. What do you make of that?
Well, AR-15s are modeled off of military weapons. They have the features that allow them to be particularly effective at assaulting a position, offensively using a firearm. And you want that for your soldiers who are fighting abroad. But there really is no place for them at home. And what we're seeing, and the reason you're seeing these guns in so many mass shootings, is because they are designed to kill as many people as possible, as fast as possible. They have the features, they have the ammunition capacity, and they have the muzzle velocity to do just that. What I make of it is that these firearms have no place in civilian hands. And we think it's time for the federal government to reenact the assault weapons ban. That was a law in the books for a decade, and we were safer for it. It's time to reinstate the assault weapons ban in this country.
How close are we to that happening, if at all? Because last night we did see a Democrat actually in Maine, whose hometown is Lewiston, have a change of heart. He said this is Democrat Congressman Jared Golden, quote, "The time has now come for me to take responsibility for this failure, which is why I now call on the United States Congress to ban assault rifles." What do you make of his change of heart, and will we ever see that ban happen again?
Well, I wouldn't be in this line of work if I didn't believe we were going to see that happen again. I think we will. And we appreciate Representative Golden joining us in the call for an assault weapons ban. Look forward to working with him. And, unfortunately, it sometimes takes tragedy to shock you out of complacency. I think that's what we saw with Representative Golden. And it's important, though, to note that he is like so many others that have changed their tune on guns because they're just looking at the situation in their country, in their district, and saying, this is not acceptable. So, I really applaud that he had the courage to really own the mistake in his position, and I hope that others follow.